Hello and welcome to the Desigo Optic, Engineering Fundamentals. Configure CFG3.F200 and connect to cloud. By the way, we will simply refer to the CFG3.F200 equipment as F200 in the future. Currently, the firmware and application in the Desigo Optic F200 device can only be updated or upgraded via the Building X device's services. For this reason, we recommend the following workflow for engineering efficiency motives. We start with the configuration of the F200 device, and at a certain stage we will switch to Building X. We will have to create a new account in the Building X cloud platform, if not already existing. It is required to create a site in Building X to be able to add a device. Now the device can be added and activated. In many cases it is required to update the firmware and application of the device before using it. With the network settings, the gateway connects to the designated system. After that, the gateway can be reached remotely, and a first login is possible. At this point, the unit must be restarted, and a new password is also defined with the next login. Let's start with the basic requirements for the connections to the device and network. Make sure that a network interface card is set up of the operating system. The continuously green run LED indicates that the device is powered on and in operation. As next, connect the F200 device to the local area network. As explained earlier, here we connect to the building automation network, and if this network mode is selected, also to the Internet. For this network mode, establish connection to the Internet via the WAN port. In both network solutions, wait until the blue LED next to the cloud icon is continuously on and indicates a successful connection to the cloud. The two network modes will be explained in more detail soon. The network interface card is either set to DHCP or, in case a fixed IP address is configured, an additional address needs to be configured in the same range. In our example, we have selected the free IP address 169.254.169.200. Press now the service button so that the service LED is continuously red. This will assign the IP address 169.254.169.254 to the local area network for 15 minutes. We are now ready to set up the F200 device. Let's start to set up the F200 device. Type in the IP address 169.254.169.254 in the web browser search field and proceed with the unsafe connection to the device. If this page with the unsafe proceed request does not appear, it must be checked whether the service button with the red LED light is still active. If not, it is required to press the service button again. If the gateway has already been used and set up, it is possible that a hardware reset is required. The execution of the hardware reset is also described in this tutorial. The user interface of this workflow step can vary and depend on whether or not the F200 gateway has never been put into operation and has old firmware and software, or a hardware reset of the device was performed, where a more current firmware and software was already loaded. This user interface appears for a device that is being put into operation for the first time. Enter the password, admin, in lowercase and press login. Please be aware it is case sensitive. In this example, the F200 gateway already contains a more recent firmware version, which requires the user to be entered as well. User and password are identical, and as before, enter admin in both fields in lowercase. Please be aware it is case sensitive. We are prompted to define a new password with attention to password rules. Next, we are asked to choose between two different network connection modes. In separate network mode, two subnets can access the gateway through separate ports and use the native firewall. With this configuration, the devices connects to the building automation network, here referred to as LAN, and Internet is using a separate network interface. This network mode has the following advantages and is therefore recommended by Siemens. It is compliance with security level 2. The use of the device native firewall allows enhanced security configuration. If the use of distributed architecture functions is planned, which extends over several subnets, it is necessary to select the separate network mode. Also, setting up solutions in corporate networks, the separate network mode is often required. It also allows connecting to the Internet via 4G USB dongle. A network configured to single mode directs all gateway traffic along a single pathway via a shared router. In this setup, vulnerable devices would be exposed to incoming attacks from external Internet traffic. Because of this, administrators must set up additional security measures such as firewalls to establish protected subnets. What are the advantages and restrictions using single network mode? The network setup is simpler and requires less engineering effort to integrate the building automation devices into the network. On the other hand, it is necessary to protect the security of the network with appropriate protection mechanisms using the router of the Internet provider. An important note before we move on. This network connection mode selection is not reversible. Verify your building's network connection mode before selecting. A configuration reset is required to change this selection, which will result in loss of existing network configuration and project data. For our case, we choose the mode recommended by Siemens, the separate network mode, and confirm it by clicking Set. Next, we are redirected to the gateway, more precisely to the menu item operation. The F200 gateway shows us the following situation. In the connection status we have the successful statuses of network interface and cloud communication. The application status does not show us any application. This status depends on whether a current application is already loaded in the gateway and can therefore vary. The serial number of the device is also visible. We will use the activation key in the Building X devices services in a moment. And the version of the operating system. At this moment it is not clear if it is up to date. We would have to know the actual version. Next, it is important to check if an update of both the firmware and the application is required. Otherwise, it is possible that all configuration data will be lost during the next update and will have to be configured again. As mentioned before, the F200 device can currently only be updated via the device's services in Building X. This is our next focus. We need to register in Building X, if we have not already done so. Building X enables administrators to manage projects easily, providing a clear view of an organization, along with its associated users and devices. It is recommended that each building owner register their devices under their own unique organization. We use the following link to access Building X. For the new registration, an email address is necessary for verification purposes. After the verification is successful, you can continue using the application. The next step is to define the organization, which is represented in Building X with the company. An organization has users and devices assigned to it. An organization manages all devices registered to it. Additionally, it creates and tracks licenses for users. In order for the customer to use Siemens infrastructure digital services, they need an agreement with Siemens. The cloud terms and conditions can be found at this site. All terms and conditions are described on this website, as well as the possibility to contact Siemens. After agreement made, it is necessary to confirm it with a tick in the white box and press Continue. In the course overview, we provide a link to a document called the Building X Sales Enablement Deck, which shows the entire portfolio of the Building X cloud platform. In Chapter, the Assisted Selling Scenario, from receiving an offer to logging in, the purchase journey is illustrated, showing when the customer receives the customer agreement and subsequent account creation information, via email. Enter now the activation or the entitlement ID of the received Building X license by email. With the successful activation, the product name is displayed, as well as all available features. The Asset Manager app is what we call the Device Manager. The registration process gives us the opportunity to verify the registration. Among other things, in our case the entitlement ID is visible here, because we have used this ID for registration. By clicking on the green button Activation, we confirm the correctness of the data and receive the confirmation with a pop-up. At this point we could choose between the following next steps: invite operators, create operator groups, create partitions, switch to the overview, or continue and postpone all options to a later time. This is what we are going to do, because we want to integrate the F200 device. The Accounts page with the overview opens. We want to add the F200 device now. From the Accounts page, by selecting Devices, we switch to the Devices page, select Sites and then the Add button. Devices belong hierarchically to a site and therefore the site must be registered. Enter all required information and click the Add button. On the new created site, click the Add button again. We are prompted to enter the activation key of the device. On the gateway setup we copy the activation key, paste it, and click on the button Validate. The tool offers us to replace an old device with this one, including the copy of all application instances from the old device, to retain the history. In our case we add a new device to a new created site and therefore confirm with the button Add without selecting the option for replacement. At this point, the device is added to the site and at the same time it prompts with the request to distribute updates to the device. The next workflow steps can vary and depend on whether or not the F200 gateway has never been put into operation and has old firmware and software, or a hardware reset of the device was performed, where a more current firmware and software was already loaded, or an error message appears when trying to perform the updates. In this case, it is recommended to perform a hardware reset, which is described in this tutorial. In our case we have a gateway that has never been in operation and both firmware and software are outdated. Select the latest application version in the drop-down menu, in our case the version 2.9.20, and with Save we start the Save the Distribution feature and have to wait until it is finished. After the first update, an orange warning shows that more updates are available. In the Updates tab it shows that a newer firmware version is available. It is recommended to start the update with the appropriate button. A pop-up will note us do not turn off device and that the device will restart automatically. Proceed by acknowledge this information. Wait until the device is updated. We continue with the updates and move to the tab Applications, where we can see that the software was updated with the latest version. In case it would show a newer version available, press the Update button to execute the function. In our case, or in case an update has been performed, we select the Install option and then press the button Synchronize. At this point, also the F200 device will show properly working applications. The additional permanently lit green LED indicates that the apps are installed and working properly. If we update the operating system, we will be logged out of the F200 device interface. Wait until the status of the device indicates that it is back online and then connect over the remote access by clicking on Open. Enter the admin user and the newly created password and log on again to the F200 device. Ensure that the applications shows a healthy status. So far, we have an up-to-date F200 gateway with healthy application statuses, which forms an important basis for the further steps. In the next steps we will configure the networking part of the gateway. Network topology helps to understand different elements of the network and where each of them connects. It also shows how each component interacts and aids in performance management. We would like to use it to better explain the next configuration settings. At the beginning, when setting up the F200 device, we opted for the safer variant of the two network modes, the separate network mode. Our IP address for the LAN connection of the F200 device is as defined here. We get the WAN IP address from the internet provider. In the firewall we have to enable both the required UDP and the TCP ports. For BAGNet communication, we can select a single UDP port or, as we show here, activate an entire range. For the TCP ports we have to enter the two internal ports which are responsible for the communication with the Desigo Optic web client. The port 8090 is used for the secure HTTPS internet connection, and the port 8085 for the unsecure HTTP communication. In case the gateway needs to be set up for Modbus or KNX system communication, also the TCP port 502 or 3671 needs to be added in the list. The routing and the proxy are not required in this network mode and topology. With the tunnel, we define the internal forwarding of information between the LAN and WAN networks. For this purpose, the local host address is used and the two ports for secure and unsecure communication to the Internet must be defined, in our case ports 8090 and 8085. This means that all information between, for example, a port 47808 of BAGNet or 502 of Modbus, is internally connected to the ports 8090 and 8085 available for the Internet. You may ask, why we configure an unsecure connection with the port 8085, as basically the secure connection should be used. If the secure port 8090 is not accessible for technical or error reasons, the gateway would still be accessible via the unsecure port. Once we have ensured cloud connectivity and updated the latest gateway application software to the F200 device, we must next configure the network. We select the menu item IP settings in Network node. In the IP settings, we see that the LAN IP range is set to auto by default. This setting is required and a DHCP server automatically assigns IP addresses on the network. At the moment, the assigned IP address from pressing the service button on the device is still current. In our case, we have defined a static IP address and therefore we have to select the Edit button. The user interface changes, we select Manual, enter the address defined in the topology, delete the IP address from the service feature, and confirm by clicking the Save button. This is the result of the IP setting changes and the WAN settings have been taken over from the provider. Next is setting up the firewall. By default, inbound traffic is not allowed on the device. We must open the port so the F200 device can communicate with the building automation network. Before we continue with the setting, we would like to point out this helpful information. In this table, the pre-configured ports are mentioned, such as insecure and secure internet connection with ports 80 and 443. The port SSH22 is used for secure shell communication. The port 5355 is based on the domain name system, DNS protocol, allowing for name resolution for hosts on the same network. The other table contains a list of ports to be used depending on the protocol type used by the integrated subsystem. We explained them all when introducing the project topology. Also here, it requires to go to edit mode to be able to change the settings. In the UDP ports we enter the range of 47808 to 47823 for the BAGNet communication we will be using for the Desigo subsystem. In the TCP we will enter both the secure and unsecure ports. Therefore, we enter 8085 and 8090, and confirm by clicking the Save button. Editing in the tunnel follows the same principle and therefore we show the result here. We have defined the two entries for secure and insecure forwarding of the information in the gateway itself. We need to resynchronize the applications to the device now, and for this, we change to the device's services, select applications, and push the button Synchronize. Please note that although an updated installed version is displayed in the previous synchronization run, it is possible that the application in the F200 unit will only be updated after the current synchronization run. A check in the Services tab shows us that a current application version is running in the device. At this point, an important general note: this Services tab basically reflects the effective status of all services with version information. The remote access of the device's services shows us two new connection options to the device. We still have the connection option for the configuration. In addition, the secure and insecure connection to the application have been added. We are ready to start the Desigo Optic application and in our case select the Secure Gateway Remote Access. We connect remotely to Desigo Optic and are asked to log in for the first time. The application tells us that it is not licensed. We use the superuser user with the abbreviation SU and the same password SU to log in. Now, we are asked to accept the end-user license agreement. To order an end-user license, the host ID of the application is required. More information about ordering licenses can be found in the Desigo Optic Fundamentals for Engineering and Sales Training module. This information can be obtained by pressing the Host Info button, highlighting the host ID and copying it. In our case, we use the engineering license and can install it straight away. We press the Install button, select the license, and receive a confirmation for the successful installation and at the same time a request to restart the system, which we can confirm with the OK button. Although we have licensed Desigo Optic, the application still shows us an error message that it is not yet licensed. This message should disappear after a restart. After licensing, it is recommended to restart the device. We can restart the device via the cloud connection. We select the maintenance menu item and push the button Restart Device, and confirm the action in the pop-up. Even if the F200 device itself indicates an operational mode with the light indicators, it can still take a few minutes until a new connection to the device can be created and the login screen appears. Already at the login screen we can see that the licensing was successful. The login credentials are the same as for the first login. Now we are asked to define a new password. When defining the new password, the password rules are also displayed. Desigo Optic now shows us the license information on the information bar and also with which user we have logged in. The F200 gateway unit is ready for use to create projects. We will show how to create and configure projects in the next training module. Next comes additional helpful information regarding functions that may be necessary in the field or further configuration options.